Hey everyone, today I was going to talk a little bit about the myth, or maybe not myth, of the queenless roar. And is your hive queenless? There are many ways to tell, but are you going to rely on the queenless roar? So I've been watching a few videos, and the queenless roar has come up a few times in the videos that I watched anyway. And I do a lot of queen rearing. I have a lot of nukes and I deal with queenlessness quite often. And I see that this queenless roar comes up. And it's not a reliable technique to decide if your hive is queenless. The queenless roar, you have to have an ear that's really tuned to your hive. If you have other hives next door to it, it's going to affect your hearing. And if you're like me, where my hearing is starting to fade with my age, you're not going to hear it at all. So it's a really unreliable technique to say, hey, my hive's queenless because they did this roar. When I open up hives in the spring, they roar at me because they didn't want me opening up their hive. It's been 2 months since the last time I opened them. When you guys in the north are opening them, it's 3, 4, maybe even 6 months. The queenless roar does exist because the hertz goes up and down. But there are many other techniques to decide if your hive is queenless. Many should be used in conjunction with one another. And if one checks the box, then you should go to the other. You should never just say, hey, my hive's queenless because they checked one box. In my business, I do the queen rearing, and you always come across queenless hives. I make queenless hives. I make queenless builders. They can have this beautiful sound, this nice builder, and they're hopelessly queenless, and it's a beautiful sound. They're kind of fussy, but then you put in a frame of grafts, and within a few minutes they settle down. I know she's queenless, so I know their sound. But we're talking maybe not queenless nukes here. We're talking your backyard hive. So what are some of these other ways to tell? One way, and not always reliable, but in a backyard, you have your hive, and maybe say it's 30, 40 feet from the house. And she's a beautiful hive. She's never bothered you. And all of a sudden you walk out one day and someone's coming up and face flying you. In my experience, face flyers are telling you there's a problem in that hive. They're coming up and saying, hey, what are you doing? You know, beekeepers know bees can get to know the beekeeper's face. So they're going to come out and say, hey, help us. Face flying. 2, how about opening your hive? There's nothing you can diagnose in your hive without opening it. So I walk up, I have 150 hives. I've got face flyer. Nothing I can do until I open up the hive, because I don't know which hive it was that was face flying me. I have to actually open the hive. If it's a hive that normally is low key, but she comes out to greet me, I've got a problem. Something's going on. Another way to tell, start pulling frames. When you start inspection, you're looking for queen, you're looking for eggs, you're looking for brood. Well, depending on your time of year, that frame is going to look slightly different. and especially depending on your environment. I'm in South Mississippi. Right now I'm in a nice goldenrod bloom. Of course, we've had a drought, so it's not as much nectar as I would have liked, and it's starting to go by. However, you pull that frame, and you want to look for eggs. Don't worry about finding your queen. You want to look for eggs, and if you can't find eggs, then you need to go and start looking. What is the last age of brood that you have? Can you still have a queen in a hive that has no eggs? Yes, you can. And she could be a virgin depending on the time of year. And so if you find no eggs and you're still unsure, and you actually have a frame of brood maybe from somebody else, if there's no eggs and you have no queen cells but they're acting funny, take a frame with eggs and from another hive and put that in your hive, your problem hive. In 4 days, if they were queenless, they'll have some type of cell or cell cup made. You may or may not want to use this queen or queen cell, but it can help diagnose what is going on in your hive. I have found as a queen breeder that when you go into a hive, that sometimes the workers get very, I'll say, lazy. They're not being told to go do their jobs, so they kind of congregate on the frame and just hang out there. They're real docile, real lazy, real quiet, and they just won't go. They're still bringing in pollen, but the pollen's accumulating because no one's using it. They're still bringing in nectar, so they start to look pollen and honey bound. They can, and this is prior to any laying worker. That's your last sign. You don't want it to go to that point. Something to keep in mind, that if you come across a lot of pollen in a frame, yes, that can indicate queenlessness because they're not using it on any new brood. It can also indicate a failing queen, in which you still want to requeen, but that's harder to tell in the spring flow, or maybe even in a fall flow if there's a lot of pollen. Again, it's one of those things, know your season. The same thing can happen with the nectar. The nectar can build up in a queenless hive, but encroach on the brood nest. That same activity can happen in the spring flow. So these are these indicators that work, but you have to know your season. When you open your hive, judge by your season. Did you just open her 10 days ago and she was a doll and now she's not? Maybe there's a change. If it's the first one in spring, she's going to come out to greet you. Even the nicest bees, I try to raise the nicest bees because I don't like wearing equipment and I don't like covering up as much, so I want them to be fairly nice. But in spring, I cover up. So just let me reiterate. You can tell from the sound if you know your hive, but that's not the best diagnostic. You can tell basically by looking. You have to get in your hive, you have to make that inspection, and then you make the call to go ahead and put a queen in there. Once you have the queen, lay her on top of the bars. If you see that they're really acting badly towards her, don't put her in. If you put a queen into a hive and they don't feed her or release her, there is a queen in your hive. Now you may have spent your $30 on a new queen or moved one over, but you still have a queen. Another indicator that I didn't quite mention was there is an activity where the bees fan and lift their rump up and show their Nasanov gland. This can happen. I've seen a couple of videos by other queen rearers that say that they always notice this. I can't say personally that I have definitely noticed that. What I do see is the laziness factor and the aggressiveness. They'll get aggressive or they get lazy. There are probably other indicators for your queen or queenlessness, but each hive will act differently. Each environment may make her act a little bit differently as well. And I don't know, maybe there's a difference between Italians, Russians, and say Carnolians. So if you do see a difference in, say, your Russian hives, leave a note down in the comments. That would be very interesting. So there are many ways to diagnose a queenless hive, but there's not just one. And you have to know what season you're in. You have to know what is your hive looking like, the state of your hive, pollen coming in, nectar coming in. These are things that you should be learning as a beekeeper and thinking about. We all forget these things at time to time and get a little cranky and say, oh my God, I've just lost my hive. Calm down. You'll fix it and go on from there. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please click the subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications, and until next time, happy beekeeping.